Greetings! It is I, Tal'Mahe'Ra, Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. We dive once more into the world of darkness. Yes. Once more into the breach. And today we continue with our discussions on Vampire the Masquerade and its various vampiric sects. Of course, we've handled many of the sects so far, but we're going to talk about one which is almost gone. One that still has shadows of it in existence, but has found itself shattered. Whether or not it could rise again, or the fractured elements unite once more, well, that's up to your storytelling. But its elements and its legacy still remain, making it an important sect to talk about, for it is an ancient one. I, of course, speak of the Tal'Mahe'Ra, the true Black Hand, the Hand without sun. So, let's dive in, and start, of course, where I normally start with a number of books you can check out in order for your enjoyment of this material. That one. Of course, the Black Hand book, one of the older books, will give you some information on them. Cain's Chosen, that's the one I want to use right then. The Black Hand. Now, this is, of course, a subset of the Sabbath sect, the Black Hand, which we'll talk about a little bit, but really, the Black Hand isn't the important here. The true Black Hand is what's important. And of course, the Black Hand, a guide to the Tal'Mahe'Ra from the 20th anniversary, where it's the best of the three books to really dive into the Tal'Mahe'Ra, and certainly the one that I would recommend out of all of those that gives you the best bit of information and what has effectively happened to them since the 90s. Because this is 20th anniversary. It was made after the time period where their backs were basically shattered. And it tells you they aren't gone. Not necessarily. Thing to think about. They're not gone. Damaged. Broken. A little fractured. But they're not gone. Now let's look to their sex symbol and talk about them a little bit. So, the sect itself is ancient. Technically speaking, it was 1999 where the back was broken, and they were headquartered out of Enoch. Now that says a lot just on these words, but the fact is there is a lot more to this entire thing. They are technically a death cult, but also a blood cult. Blood cults are those that see the ways of the first city and want to recreate it. In the first city, kindred had their power over mortals. They basically were like chosen ones, gods, spiritual leaders. And the thing is, mortals knew about their existence, worshipped them, gave up their blood willingly. So it was basically like this entire idea of worship of vampires, and their herds are right there. That is the kind of basis of these. So they're ancient ways of doing things. But these in particular worship a group of beings known as the Iralu. Iralu, whether they still exist or not, is honestly a mystery. And who they were, also a mystery. They believed them to be a set of antediluvians who were sealed away in Enoch. Again, we'll talk about that in a second here. But their names were Nergal, Nimang, Laz, and Al-Marhi. Those were the names engraved on their tombs. And they existed here, basically venerated by the Tal'Mahe'Ra, who believed they were antediluvians and Topor. Who they really were, up to debate, and their identities kind of thrown into mystery. The fact is that when Enoch was effectively destroyed in the Sixth Great Maelstrom, and the Elaru were thought to go with them, but their fate is kind of unknown. there was a researcher that peered into the underworld during the Sixth Great Maelstrom and saw glowing angelic figures rise to survey their surroundings. And then they kind of simply vanished, so they could be related to that, or it could just be some other being. There are suggestions that 3 of the figures that rose from the Tempest, or the Ra'adu themselves, might be the messengers from Hunter the Reckoning. There's a lot of speculation about the Ra'adu himself. I've talked a little bit about them in a video on Antediluvians, kind of speculating on the side of them being Antediluvians, so if you want to go check out that much older video. There is some new lore related, that kind of thing, that has come into existence since I did that video, but that video does handle them a little bit more. Enoch. We're not talking about Enoch, the first city Enoch, because that is the first city itself. We're talking about the underworld version of it. What do you mean by that? Well, the city was destroyed physically in the Great Flood, and the thing is, though, the underworld retained its version of the first city in the Shadowlands. So, basically, the first city was destroyed, but the shadow version of it continued to exist. A lot of things happened, and it ended up being, basically, during the events of the end of the Empire, a relic nuclear weapon was used, creating the Sixth Great Maelstrom, and the end of Stygia. Stygia basically being the capital of Dead in the Wraith of Oblivion. It's a... Basically, that destruction also ended up being the destruction of Enoch. At least it cannot be reached by any means known to any beings at this point in time, and seems to have been destroyed. So, yeah. A lot of the True Black Hand was wiped out with it, because that's where they were existing at. A few powerful ones managed to escape the destruction of their, and any members of the organization that were not in Enoch at the time, of course, survived the nuclear weapon. The term relic being used by wraiths, that it's made to basically... It's kind of like a... Think of it magic. It's harder to describe because I'm not going into wraith stuff right now, but it is a weapon made to destroy spiritual energy, basically. High blaze. So, and the Ends of the Empire is one of the Gehenna storylines. During the Apocalypse stuff, before 20th anniversary, a lot of them had their effects happen. Whether or not they were actually end of the world things, they weren't. But a lot of these end of the world events did occur, just to varying degrees in the stories. So if you want to check out the Ends of the Empire storyline in the Gehenna source book, it's the End of the Empire book. It was the end of that was the Wraith of the Oblivion one. It was similar to the Gehenna and Apocalypse books that were put out in the World of Darkness a few years earlier. So this was the End of the Empire is the Wraith book. It will dedicate information to the Sixth Great Maelstrom and what it meant and all that stuff. But just know that's where the End of Enoch comes in. Okay. We'll talk about that more, though, when we go over Tal'Mahe'Ra's history. But that's kind of a basic idea that, we've established a lot of information and a lot of the side things that exist here. Okay, cool, great. So, to outsiders, the True Black Hand is a bizarre, paranoid conspiracy of a sect that spends little time in contact with other members of kindred society. They're really not known about in the general population. There is rumors of them here and there. Some consider their stories to be ancient, just, rumors, things that existed and went away. And we know that, or their stronghold was in the underworld, using ghosts and stuff to protect it, and a lot of spirits of the dead, necromancy and stuff. Their mission did seem to be one of shepherding and putting the world towards the end it understands. Using information in the first city described in the Book of Nods and their vision of it. They don't have physical domains in the real world. So in the physical world, Tal'Mahe'Ra didn't have physical domains. It has estates, nexuses, places where they breed ghoul servants, send agents into the world, and the biggest thing that they had was influence over the Sabbat through the Black Hand. a subsect of the Sabbat. So, we'll just go over briefly who the Black Hand is, but just know the Black Hand is heavily influenced by the true Black Hand. Who are the Black Hand? Well, it was a subdivision of the Sabbat, a sect within a sect, elite vampires recognized amongst others of the Sabbat, and they were effectively the Sabbat military. So think about this. The Sabbat military is basically been controlled by the true Black Hand. Yes. So, granted, the Sixth Great Maelstrom has kind of broken things a little bit for that one. And originally the Black Hand wasn't this. It originally was this group that was established kind of a short time after the Convention of Thorns as basically assassins, more or less. It was a military branch. But then the true Black Hand began incorporating themselves, corrupting them, changing their goals to be more along the lines of the Tal'Mahe'Ra's ideas, serve the antediluvians during Gehenna. And yeah, the things that happened with the Sixth Great Maelstrom kind of broke that a little bit. Whether or not there's still influence in there is hard to say. But if you remember, Seraph was a title in amongst the Sabbat. I had a Sabbat video previously. The high Seraphim were thought to be members of the True Black Hand, and a couple of them, 2 of them, disappeared basically when the Sixth Great Maelstrom occurred. So, I guess this is actually has different... Seraph is actually... I didn't talk about it because it's the rank in here. I'll probably have to do a Black Hand video, like a small one, on and of itself at some point in time when I do some smaller sects, because I don't think we've dove enough into that to talk about it. But it's an interesting one to discuss, and it will link up to this one very heavily. So, let's talk about the history of the Tal'Mahe'Ra. So, it is ancient, and it was formed by an unlikely alliance between Chakravanti mages and several vampire clans, notably Assamites, and though those members include other supernatural creatures besides vampires and mages. So they parted during the first millennium CE because of different ideas regarding the future of the sects, though there were 2 factions, Western Echen Magnus Nigrum. They weren't not at war with each other, though, these 2 sets that broke away, but they didn't communicate with each other. So, during the Dark Ages, the Eastern faction concerned itself with hell, purgatory, the souls of the unholy, and things like that. The Western involved itself with vampire politics and had plans to eliminate the Bali, demon-worshipping vampires. The Magnus Nigrum believed in the existence of so many vampires during the Dark Ages. They wanted to basically decimate the numbers. There were too many vampires, during the Dark Ages even. So they collected information on vampires they came across, and they had a book of names, havens of basically every vampire they wanted to present to the antediluvians during Gehenna. Remember, I've already said they're big on end of the world and antediluvians. Mentioned that already. So mentioning the fact that they're basically compiling a book of every individual that they can and where they live to present to the antediluvians and like, hey, who do you want us to eliminate? So they can actually find where their children were, you know, and their descendants and stuff. There were some rumors that they had something to do with the deaths of antediluvians too, which is an unusual rumor, but, you know, there's things there. So, in the end, though, they were technically eliminated during the end of the Empire, targeted by a nuclear attack that went after Stygia, and a second nuke that was launched at the heart of the Labyrinth, which is another area. We'd have to dive into Wraith of the Oblivion. It's another region of the underworld, basically, though. And Enoch was annihilated. A lot of the leadership went away. The Aralu provided no forewarning of the attack. Nothing. Were silent afterwards. Basically, no one knows what happened to them. And the next damaging thing was, of course, the Week of Nightmares. Here, the ravenous antediluvian rose and began to wage war against the Quaijin. I haven't really talked about it, but it is a big major event. I talked about a little bit of it when I talked about Ravnos, the clan, so you want to go check and learn about that a little bit. But then their members of their sect rushed to India to assist it. The Ravenous Antediluvian didn't acknowledge them in any way. It didn't matter to them. And this led to a chunk of the members losing faith. And now what's left over is a number of Gehenna cults, basically, that broke apart. Basically, end of the world. They're doing the same thing, but they've fractured even more than these two factions. So it's sort of like the Tal'Mahe'Ra is not organized anymore, unfortunately for them. They broke apart into smaller groups and smaller groups. The Nagaraja perished, most of them during the attack. The survivors went to the Green Court. They provided information on what's going on in the underworld to them. The Green Court, of course, in Korea being the body of the Quaijin in Korea. So they shared their knowledge of necromancy too. They're honored guests, but they aren't permitted to embrace, though. So the Nagaraja continue to exist. And the Nagaraja, again, I have a video on them, but they are vampires that are cursed with not drinking blood, but eating flesh. So they are one of the most hated clans by everybody else, or bloodlines, I should say. But they were part of this because they were in the Tal'Mahe'Ra, and, so they're there. A lot of True Bruja basically struck up partnerships with the followers of Set, and the remainder are disguised in other clans, another bloodline. And the Semiche of the old clan returned to Eastern Europe, even more embittered against working with other vampires before. The Ophidian Solidarity remains the one cult that continues to work in the ashes of Enoch. So it is one of the remaining, basically, cores of the Tal'Mahe'Ra is now the Ephirian Solidarity. So they're a little bit of what's left. Again, it's the thing that there is a legacy of it. There's a lot of these members around. There's a lot of these beings that still believe in the thing of it. They're just no longer united as one group. And that's the big thing that's what happened to the Tal'Mahe'Ra, is their united ways have been fractured a lot. So we'll talk about a bunch of this stuff here, but we should talk about the Tal'Mahe'Ras. About the way they do things a little bit here. So, they thought antediluvians would have a crusade to destroy a lot of other vampires, and they were hoping, basically, by joining with them, they'd be spared during Gehenna. Purge a lot of those that have turned against the way of the antediluvians, things like that. They wanted to eliminate impure bloodlines like the Tremere and the Semiche, they believed. It was one of the oldest sects still active. And the thing is, technically speaking, its ancestor or descendants, it's what's left of it still is active, even though it's not a major group anymore. There are a lot of bloodlines that were a lot less exclusive to it. It also implied several Revenant families. Revenants being basically ghoul families that have bred enough that people are born as ghouls. They also specifically kidnapped and trained children known as chatterlings to become vampires. And they were embraced when they were 23-year-old. Basically, kidnap you as a child, train you in a lot of things, embrace you when you're 23, and you're an adult finally, and you're basically made to be elite agents that were indoctrinated into your group here. Because they were... True Black Hand didn't do great things anyway. I'm just going to say that there. But they were concerned with two major events. The eventual return of the Antediluvians, and the second was the coming age of vampiric taint would be eliminated from Earth. So that was the two things they were concerned with. Anyway, the ruling body was the Wazir, a 13-person council of 3... I'm going to butcher this name here. Lich, or Yamasvata, as it's known in India. And they were technically mages, to say those. So 3 of those. Remember, they were made from a set of mages and vampires, technically. And the Seraphim, 9 military leaders. They're the generals of the Black Hand. Hey, guess what? The normal Black Hand uses the term Seraph for their generals, too. Or Seraphim. The true Black Hand does it also. And a principal leader, the Del Ro, which is the supreme leader of the true Black Hand. And there was the... Oh, we missed the... I'm sorry, I gotta mention... The Eastern and Western Hats did reunite, technically, during the Treaty of Enoch in the 1700s, where they got back and elected a Central Del Ro over that. So, yeah. There was an actual reunition of the 2 sets. I did forget to mention that. Again, you know. There currently is still a Del Ro in charge of it, has held the position for 250 years. Tends to be the eldest. We know that a lot have, again, some powerful members survived. We know that. That's the thing. And they do use a vinculum on a number of members. You basically produce the blood of Del Ro, at least 1 Seraph and 1 other hand members. Basically a community blood bond is one of the things that they do use. Anyway, also the mummy, Inahoten, sat on the council as an equal. Wasn't really part of the normal council, but was on the thing. And then they had their seat of power located in the fortress city of Enoch. And then you pass between the underworld, the living world. The Del Ro resides exclusively in the underworld. So, yeah. And remember, I did say a bunch of their leadership did get away. Some of their most powerful members did escape the destruction of Enoch. Keep that in mind. Anyway, it was a cellular structure with less than 200 members loosely organized in smaller courts, orbiting around and manipulated by the Wazir, most of which are technically kept in the dark about true connections to the other. And it had powerful influence over a lot of other sects. Now, as I said, we'll do like something on the Black Hand on itself, but with the Black Hand, it really was a set of front for the true Black Hand memberships throughout the sect. Effectively, they believed that there had been some corruption in the in a lot of those other groups, and getting in with them, they had about connections there. There are about 60 members in the false Black Hand, as they're called, as well as members of true Black Hand as well. A Seraphim, Izum, Urbal, and Dejua. It controlled the false hand, as they called it, and changed its values, sent it on stuff. In the Camarilla had the Camarilla hand. A sect claimed about a dozen princes are members of them, as well as 40 Primogem and a Justicar. Some members, I took order from Magnus, Nerum operatives. It's kind of unknown, but there was members there. And then 50 hand members have havens in the Middle East, along with followers of Set and Assamites in the Kwaijin. So they had operatives all over the place. There were unconfirmed reports that they had it with the Konyu, and just as likely the Konyu had operatives with the true Black Hand, but, you know, it's the same thing, that they were on each other. And also claimed to have several non-vampire supernatural creatures, mummies, an abomination, a small number of mages, a few wraiths, and 3 ghoul families under their control. So again, we're talking about, like, we have this organization, we're spread out, we have our influence. The big thing is, again, in the Sabbat, but you also have these hands in other places, too. And, you know, trying my best to explain the mess that is the Tal'Mahe'Ra, because it is a set within all the other sets, is the best way to describe it. They are very much so in integration things. So, the big three groups that helped, again, found what become the True Black Hand, or the Manus Nigrum. I have to say Magnus Nigrum, there's another name for it. So if I say that too, it's like the Tal'Mahe'Ra. The founding ones were Old Clan Simiche. Basically, when the Simiche clan broke, a group of them became Old Clan. I talked about my Simiche things, the Nagarasha, and the Danava. So those were pretty big groups. And Danava are bloodline of Ventru. So, again, that's another group. I've talked about them before. Again, check out all my Clans of Bloodline videos. The True Bruja came around the ranks during the split, basically, when they originally split into the two versions of the Magnus Nigrum, before reuniting again, of course. They were very rare, and some of them were in it. There are other groups that exactly have had members too. A lot of these bloodlines and smaller groups within bigger clans have found themselves with a lot of damage because, of course, the destruction of Enoch. There were also some unique other bloodlines that came aligned with the sects. The Molochim Bali, so the Order of Moloch within the Bali, which is anti-infernalists within the Bali. That's a thing to talk about in and of its own right. I think I've talked about the Daughters of Cacophony, Harbingers of Skulls, the Lamia, the Megahir, Talik. Remember, some of these groups are now part of what would be called the new group Hecta. Hecta, remember, is the reunition of Giovanni and a lot of its other subsets. Why was Hecta formed? Well, a number of these, Harbingers of Skulls, and a few others, well, they joined with it. Some Nagaraja and some Lamia. I've mentioned a bunch of these groups now. They helped form Hecta. Hecta, as a clan now, which is a unition of a bunch of all these different, bloodlines that kind of come from the same thing that have become one blood now. The destruction of the main group of Tal'Mahe'Ra drove a bunch of these to there. The events of both Enoch and the Week of Nightmares basically led to the downfall of a lot of the power of the Tal'Mahe'Ra, and, as you can see, led to some other groups like the Hecta being formed. Now, granted, in modern Knights, they had allowed a lot of groups in to, save for the followers of sets, they were enemies of the Nagaraja. Things like Giovanni and mainline clan Simiche were tolerated by the Harbors and the Old Clan, respectively. Trolleys, Lasamra, Tremere recruits were granted consideration, but they were often put with hostility and had to prove themselves loyal. So there were other groups that could join with the Tal'Mahe'Ra before its big destruction. They were increasing their membership. So, again, it has been fractured, but there are these essences, these smaller groups that are fractured parts of it. And it doesn't mean, again, some powerful leaders remain. They haven't. They could reorganize. They could. The clan Hecta, as it exists, is independent. But large chunk of members of them, the founders of them, they are connected originally with the Tal'Mahe'Ra. I'm not saying it could happen. But maybe. Interesting storyline would be Hecta, in its new version, would certainly become the harbinger of the new Tal'Mahe'Ra. It'd be an interesting storyline, but I'm curious if 6th edition will explore anything with them. Because though they've been fractured and pretty much their back has been broken, it's not like they're gone completely. They've lost a lot of membership, but they aren't gone. Similar to like Ravnos isn't gone. Damaged heavily, but they're not gone. Yeah. Anyway. So yes. Anyway. That's most of what we got for the Tal'Mahe'Ra. It has had some development. And the big thing, of course, is we know they're not destroyed. The Black Hand guidebook in V20 basically tells us after their major destruction, it's not destroyed, it's heavily damaged, it's hurt, it's a little fractured, but big leaders are still there, they still have some power. It's some of those things that we know because of V20 they've been brought back. What this means for the storylines and stuff, and whether or not 6th edition will actually use them, I don't know. 6th edition has taken storylines in very interesting directions, and certainly they've kind of expanded upon a bunch of the stuff that was occurring in V20, which is a good thing, I think. And certainly I've had my complaints about aspects of the way they take their storylines, but overall I have enjoyed it, and I would be curious if we can see a resurgence of what was the Tal'Mahe'Ra, because as much as they are a secret sect and they have very interesting beliefs and very dark things that they do, very terrible things that they do, like many vampires do, they still were a part of the overall narrative of vampires, because they represented something that was quite ancient. Think about it. They represented an old ways of the first city. That's what they wanted to recreate. They wanted the first city back. They wanted that kind of time period. And of course, they were very big on the belief of wipe out as much of the taint and spread of, terrible vampires as they are, that a lot of the blood had to be culled. But they went about things in very secretive, infiltrative ways, and just had it very difficult to recruit members, or created very terrible, basically units that they developed, that kidnap some people, train them until they're adults and, some kids, and make them into specialized units. It's pretty bad. Certainly, I think I will have to hit upon the Black Hand at some point in time and talk about them too, and dive into them on, whether that's a full video on its own, or I'd have it as a day where I do a couple of things. I don't know. But I think I've kind of hit enough about, stuff here to understand their group. Anyway. There are a lot of members, like Inahiten, probably didn't survive. And granted, most likely a mummy, but could have been something else. That's one of those weird things. It's like, there's just so much secrecy and unknowns when it comes to Tal'Mahe'Ra. It allows storytellers to expand things in different ways. Things like, these leaders, who are they, what their form is, what they come about in. Okay, then we talk about the Aralu and their existence and what they really are and all these different things about them. It's just so unusual, and it also just adds this level of complexity to the entire thing that just is interesting. I think the thing about the Tal'Mahe'Ra, the True Black Hand, or even if you just want to go by some of the other names, the Hand Without Sun, Magnus Nigiro, they have a complex history, which, the idea, because they're so fractured to begin with, means they could easily fracture into different factions dealing with things. Eventually, they do find some common ground. And I think we've seen that before. I think that's the thing, too. We've seen them fracture before and eventually regain themselves. So now, weakened, fractured. Doesn't mean they can't come back. I think that's the way to look at their history. And again, I would definitely recommend, if you're going to dive even deeper into this, the Guide to Tal'Mahe'Ra, the Black Handbook, that one from V20. That will give you a lot more pages than I can go over in half an hour of talking to you about them. I can give you an overview here, I can give you some information, but I want you out there, you people out there who are watching this and enjoying this and learning about this, to know about this group and to consider using them. Because as much as we have our Camarilla, our Anarchs, our Sabbat, and our other big name sects out there, which are really important, they take up the limelight. Little interesting groups like this, which could have very complex histories, complex adventures, are ones that I definitely recommend checking out. But, we'll talk about more in the future. There are other major and minor groups to talk about, other sects that are out there, certainly, to discuss. I'm only done a bit of the list of them all, But thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed. There are great ways to support the channel. I always shout these out. If you are watching on Twitch, leave a follow. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a subscription, a like, a comment. Have you used the Tal'Mahe'Ra before? I've used it here and there in a little bit ways, and I actually used a storyline where the fractured remains of Enoch, some of it remained after the blast, that there was a little fractured part that still existed, a core of it. That was Legacies of Cain. I'd recommend checking it out to see a little bit of when I used the Tal'Mahe'Ra. But also, ring the bell for notifications and stuff like that. I've got to shout that out too. And if you're watching on YouTube, check me out live on Twitch. Usually I am live for tabletop stuff, to shout that out, every Tuesdays and Thursdays in the afternoon, and then every Saturday, usually in the early morning, a little later today. And if you're watching on Twitch, hey, I'd say check out YouTube. Great stuff to see a lot of these videos you've missed, and a lot of the older videos that I reference and stuff like that too. A lot of all my tabletop stuff there. Anyway, as usual, though, if you're checking out other stuff that I do in the schedule, I do Discussing Tabletop every Saturday afternoon. Goes up on YouTube a couple days later. That's my tabletop discussion show. Talk about news of the week and more, and deep discussions and tabletop topics. Every Wednesday, currently, is Buccaneers of Shackled Sea, a live play of Pathfinder, the first edition. Again, up on YouTube a few days later. And then if you just want to see some random gaming, I do variety gaming on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. So that's just, doesn't go up on YouTube, but that's something to check out. So anyway, out there, all of you, I hope you enjoyed. Oh, Discord and Twitter, great places to see what's going on. I'm sorry, Discord and the website formerly known as Twitter. Links there to see what's going on the schedule and stuff like that. Anyway, everyone out there, I hope you've enjoyed. I'm going to say farewell for now. It was a little bit of a shorter one, but the Tal'Mahe'Ra is an interesting one to talk about. And certainly, I would recommend a deeper dive in getting the copy of the book. It's one of those things is I can go over everything in the book, but I just want you to be interested enough to do some research on your own. Google it. Get a PDF. Physical copy if you can find one. Anyway, all of you out there, I bid you all a wonderful farewell.